a period from 1951 to today is quite a long period to cover in reviewing the relationship between the UK and China. But that was when my father first became involved with China, when he met Premier Zhou Enlai's special envoy coming to Europe to find someone to reopen China's trade with Europe. My father met him at a dinner. My father was self-educated, left school at 15. He was invited to a dinner at Cambridge, which was a great thrill for him. He met Professor Joan Robinson and Dr. Joseph Needham at a dinner with a Chinese man who spoke with a very good American accent with his English. My father didn't know he came from China till later. And they discussed all matter of world events. At that time, the Korean War was ongoing. At that time, the Moscow Economic Conference was about to happen. And after the dinner, about 10 days later, Chi Chao-ching, as he was then, as his name was, invited my father to go to Basel in Switzerland to meet him to discuss a business venture. And my father was delighted, having been caught in England throughout the Second World War, delighted to travel. There, Chi Chao-ching told him who he was, what he was there for, and asked my father if he would lead the effort to reopen trade with Europe. And that is what my father, after consulting my mother, decided to do. The business started in 1952 with wool tops from Yorkshire going to China. They asked for the letter of credit from the Bank of China to be confirmed by a British bank. And that was the first experience he had of how China reacted to a matter of principle. They said, our letters of credit have been operating for many years from Bank of China in London, and we see no need to have them confirmed by a Western bank. And in the end, the merchant accepted the risk and everything went through smoothly. My father went to China with 19 people the next year in 1953. That was the icebreaker mission, which has become legendary. That was the first trade mission that was done between Europe and China. And in 1954, what was then the British Council for Promotion of International Trade changed its name to the 48 Group, specializing in trade with China. And for the next 70 plus years, we have carried on the business of developing the business between Britain and China, between Europe and China. And then in 1972, when I first became involved, between America and China, we did the first deals between the United States and China, selling American goods to China for the first time. For my father, that experience in 1953 was shattering. He had never seen poverty and destitution, famine, drought, and disease the way he saw it when he went into China in 1953. It left a deep mark on him, and one that we all inherited, as understanding where China was coming from after a long period of war against Japan and civil war. Bit by bit, we all, but particularly my father, became able to know the Chinese that he met with and began to understand something of the Chinese history that Dr. Joseph Needham was an expert in, and Professor Joan Robinson as well. We kind of gained a lot from my father's experience of the long trips he made to China. We missed him, but when he was there, he wrote us long letters, and when he came back, he sat and told us of his experiences in China. Through him, we experienced the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. My first trip was about 50 years ago right now. We were asked quietly by China to assist with making their first purchases of bulk commodities from China. And my father, as I was leaving university, asked me to be part of the team that did that. And we concluded the first deals shortly after President Nixon was in China. So it was a relationship which was always accompanied by all the formality of government-to-government relations and all that was going on in the world. When I went to America in 1972 with my father, and we met Kissinger's people and many other leading Americans, it was a time when America was trying to become able to understand the country that they had cut themselves off from for something like 50 years. It was a wonderful experience of being able to talk about China and explain it. At the same time, Edward Heath was taking the steps in London to exchange ambassadors with China. And that is, of course, what this program captures, that moment of exchange of ambassadors between Britain and China. And as we know from history, Edward Heath was probably one of the more progressive prime ministers in terms of understanding the world situation and wanting to open up full relations with China. We became somewhat closer to him as time went on, and particularly after he left office as prime minister. And for those 50 years from then to now, the transformation in the world and the transformation in China is just beyond belief. But most of our work was spent buying and selling to China, or buying from China and selling to the West. We had a pretty big business, and it was difficult, it was complicated, but it was also very challenging and very interesting. During that time, I developed an interest in trying to understand the long-term trends, which really punctuated what China was trying to do with its export, imports, and later its investments. And that is why I'm a little bit unusual in being a businessman with an academic or think tank interest in China. And often I'm interviewed to talk about the latest developments in China or between China and the world. That's been very fascinating and very stimulating to me. But I think probably, discussing a trade contract is a little bit dull. But along the way, we've been involved in opening up people-to-people relations, sporting relations, and cultural relations.
喜欢这个视频，别忘了转发给朋友，还有别忘了订阅小兔大世界哦。